Hello guys and welcome back to another video. So today what I have for you is some testing that I've been doing with ice staff tanking now that Homestead is hit, with particular respect to my Nightblade. Now I don't actually have a formalized build as of yet, but I do have a few ideas and I will be farming a few sets and testing it out before actually releasing a video on it in hopefully a relatively short amount of time, so look forward to that. Now, one of the things I wanted to test in this video was how the charge trait was going to work out, and in particular using it as a backbar option, because on backbar for tanks the trait you use itself doesn't matter too much. Yes, things like defending can allow you a little bit more survivability and make you feel a bit safer when bar swapping, but in general, to be honest, it doesn't matter as much as you might think. So charge is kind of interesting because it's going to raise the amount of sort of chance we have to actually proc the status effect that Chilled now has, which is Minor Maim, which allows us to debuff enemies' damage. They're particularly useful in large sort of AoE fights, and as I've said in my other videos about ice staff tanking, perhaps can operate in a similar vein to Talons, which DKs have, which allows you to apply Minor Maim a little bit more consistently, kind of, multiple enemies at once, which wasn't really possible on a Magicka tank before because your stamina pool wasn't really that big enough to allow you to heroic slash all the enemies, and in addition that is kind of time consuming. Now just to touch on why I think charge might be necessary, is that the proc chance of the status effect is actually quite low. Just to put it in perspective, in this build we're going to be using Pulsar and using Wall of Elements. Now for Wall of Elements the chance to proc it is 1% I believe at base because it's a damage over time ground ability, and for Pulsar since it's a single target AoE ability that will be a 5% chance to proc the status effect. So if we boost it up with Charged, which at gold I believe is 225% bonus, this can actually raise it quite substantially and means that we can apply it a bit more consistently. And I think honestly, having tested it, and you'll see in the video here, that actually you see enemies getting snared quite a lot. And the way this interaction works is, if we apply the Chilled status effect and we have Wall of Elements on the ground, it's going to snare them in place, and then I guess kind of like Talons, right? So just like Talons sort of immobilizes and debuffs them, likewise with Wall of Elements getting applied on the ground right now, and using my Pulsar you'll see the enemies with little icicles at their feet getting snared, which means it's actually working as intended. Now obviously it's not going to be quite as good as Talons, because Talons is going to apply all the time, there's no chance involved, and it's also very easy to kind of situate where you're actually Talonsing them, and this is something I'll get in a little bit. You actually have to be a little bit careful sometimes, because since it is an RNG effect, like we're watching right now, and this is actually the clip I wanted to highlight it in, you'll see I get aggro on both of them, I go to where I want to stack, I turn around, apply, well, I badly timed that, but I apply my Wall of Elements to the ground, and unfortunately, as you see at the back there, I've slowed it down as you can see, that ad actually gets snared in place, meaning we can't stack it. So that does mean that there's a little bit of a more kind of mindful thinking involved in this technique. As with Talons, you generally just wait for them to group up and then use it. But with Wall of Elements, every so often you'll see that it actually applies to an enemy, even though it's a small chance, it'll apply to them and actually take them out of the stack. Another thing to keep in mind since we are using Charged is that sometimes, like right here, we're getting damaged quite significantly when we get aggro on all of the ads. So it's important to actually, pre-apply your major defensive buffs. Now this is pretty easy on most tanking classes, but for Nightblade it can be a little bit less so because it's only a 10-second buff. In this next trash ball I make sure to do just that, keep my defensive buffs up before swapping to my charged back bar and apply my ice staff abilities, and as you see once again, actually the proc rate of them getting snared in place is relatively high, or at least I think it's good enough to be somewhat viable in a Magicka tank Nightblade build at the very least. Now also keep in mind, an additional benefit of doing this is not only are you providing a little bit of extra damage to help clear ads faster, but you are also, if they are liable to the debuff, and not all enemies are, having their health reduced by 10%, which is an added bonus to the extra damage you're providing in an AoE environment, and helps you AoE down and kill enemies a lot faster, and in some sense then is supportive because it means that there's less chance that something can go wrong if ads are dying quicker, it's just a lot more clean. Another point I want to touch on is the taunt mechanic, heavy attacking with ice staffs provided. If you're not familiar, basically when you complete a fully charged heavy attack, when it hits a particular ad or enemy in question, it will taunt them to you for I believe it's 14 seconds, and also provide you with a small damage shield. Now in my experience from testing, this really isn't something you can rely on. Yes, it can be used in certain situations, but if you really do need, I think, a reliable range taunt, because frequently enough you will be required to do it, and sometimes you will not be able to channel a heavy attack because you get smashed by the boss's heavy attack themselves, you get knocked down, you get interrupted, things like that. So yes, it is okay, but honestly guys, don't think you can take off Inner Fire or the other more for the range taunt, because it is necessary in my opinion still. However, there are some changes I have made to the build because of how ice staffs work, and this is in particular relation to how resource management works when using an ice staff. So many people who do tank are probably already familiar with the fact that when you're blocking your sword on board, your stamina recovery is set to 0, meaning that your stamina is going to continually go down unless you sort of maintain it some way, like for shards or for heavy attacking. Now similarly to ice staffs, when you're blocking on an ice staff, your magicka recovery is set to 0, and it uses magicka to block, meaning that your magicka, pool is going to go down unless you do something about it. So this clip here actually showcases it quite well, and you'll see that when my stamina goes down, and it goes down to 0 very quickly, I can actually swap to my ice staff, and this allows me to very easily sustain my stamina back up to a reasonable level, which then in turn allows me to juggle back and go back to my sword and board. So in a sense, we now have another way of managing our resources effectively, in addition to the ways you may be more familiar with, such as on your DK tank. Now, one of the downsides to that is that we have to learn then to how I actually do it effectively, and in this video you'll see I probably could have done things a bit better, but I do believe a little bit of effort, this could be a very useful way, and one that actually will probably make you feel more independent, at least as a magicka tank or a non-DK tank, in managing your resources without having to rely on a healer for shards or things like that. Still very positive, and I am quite happy with how it played out. You will also note that in this build, at least if you've seen my magicka Nightblade build, I'm not running Major Evasion either, or Orbs. Now the reason I'm not running Major Evasion is because it got nerfed, and the resistance buff it did provide in the Nightblade is provided with Combat Prayer, so it's not necessarily needed. This does mean obviously that with Tavas, I'm not going to be running that on my Nightblade tank anymore, and I'll keep you updated on how I change the build in the future. Also, in a similar vein to using an Ice Staff and it being ranged, I'm not using Magicka Orbs anymore. Now this one is something you could consider using, but honestly I found that since our bar slots are quite crowded, that there's not really space for it, and it's more beneficial to have the Wall of Elements and Pulsar interaction than it is to be providing a little bit more magicka to the group, because otherwise you can't snare enemies in place, and this means that ranged adds are liable to run back out of the stack. Now one thing if you haven't, and I realise maybe I should have mentioned this if you haven't seen my videos before, the set I'm using to drag enemies in is Swarm Mothers, a really strong set on anything other than a DK because it provides us with a chain effect. And you may be thinking, well, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? We've got Swarm Mothers, kind of like chains, we have our Ice Staff with all the elements of Pulsar, kind of operating like talons, and honestly I do think this is kind of what ZOS is getting at. They're trying to provide us with options and tools, which allows us to function in a similar way to DKs, while being a little bit unique and not being an identical mechanic. So, has the disparity between DK and non-DK tanks finally been fixed? Well, in some situations I think there has been improvements. Certainly there is room to grow. But unfortunately, when it comes down to the hardest content, to veteran trials, things like that, DK tanks still shine. I put this build into a Vet Halra, and I felt quite squishy. I really didn't feel as confident on my DK tank, and I honestly felt that my Nightblade wasn't providing as much to the group as my DK was, while simultaneously also being squishier. Now, is this as a result of my inexperience with tanking as a Nightblade in trials? Perhaps, and I will do a little bit more testing to see if there perhaps is a build that I'm missing which could work out quite well, but I'm still convinced that DK tanks are the undisputed kings of endgame tanking at the moment, though at the end of the day I still appreciate the efforts ZOS has put in to trying to level the playing fields, at least in veteran group content like 4-mans and things like that, where certainly I've seen improved added benefits to non-DK tanking. So that's about all of the main points I had that I wanted to discuss today with regards to Ice Staff tanking and the testing I've been doing. Now, one final thing that I'll discuss is Homestead and housing changes and maybe my thoughts on that for those that are interested. So feel free to disappear at this point in time if you just wanted to hear about the tanking changes. So with Homestead I have quite enjoyed it. The one thing I will say is that trying to decide on a house has been quite difficult. For me I really wanted a place that was in a good location, beside hand-in locations, beside crafting stations, so I could really just leave the house and be where I wanted to be without having to teleport around multiple times. And that is one of the things that I don't like too much about some of the houses, especially the bigger ones, is often they're in some obscure location which necessitates multiple load screens, which wasn't really something I was too big of a fan. Another thing that I will say is that some of the houses are, more or less just complete carbon copies of pre-existing buildings in the game, and while that is thematically nice, it's not something I've enjoyed too much, as it is a little bit, I guess, lazier of them to do rather than providing unique houses, so the environments around them in general are quite well done. So I did actually decide to buy the Ampel domicile here, and this is a house in coincide with any Argonian house that many people probably don't like because of, well, the stunning architecture that the Argonians like to have, which is the mud hut. Now, my particular reasons for choosing this property was first because it's in a great location beside everything that I need just outside the front door. In addition to that, it also features Aelid ruins, as you saw, the front door, and also the flagstones on the ground, in addition to this small kind of, pool, I guess, which is sort of cool. It's a very cheap property, as you'll see, which is added appeal. The outside of the house is also really important because I didn't want to feel hemmed in or kind of claustrophobic in the house. I wanted it to feel open and kind of open to the air in particular. Now, this is why I found this property particularly appealing as well, and for the 190k price range, you can't really beat it. When compared to the same size houses, which are even probably more expensive in many cases, they really had very small outdoors, or if they were very hemmed in and felt quite dark. So this is why I'd recommend this property to you, but you will have to get around the mud hut architecture, as I know it's not for everybody. As we load into our brand new property and get the Landover achievement, which pops up nicely right there, I also want to show you what I've done with the house briefly. Now, I have had my girlfriend help me out a little bit with this in terms of crafting, as I have been more focused on testing out the PvE aspect and not so much the housing. Now, that picture on the left there actually slots quite nicely into the wall, and it's probably the thing I like the most in the house. And I got that from HRC, so keep in mind you can get some nice paintings from these trials, which is nice in addition to maybe some other collectibles I'm unaware of. I also decided to try and put like a little headstand on the top of the entrance to the house there, in addition to my mudcrab pet, which sits in the pool of water, and I thought, well, it was quite nice from a thematic standpoint. And in my opinion, honestly, the mudcrab pet is probably one of the better ones. It looks best when actually being stationary, as the others can be a little bit lifeless. Anyways, guys, that's about it from me for today. I hope you did enjoy this video, and if you did, let me know in the comments down below. In addition to that, any help that you require, please don't hesitate to ask. Anyways, guys, until next time, bye for now.